progress about them. That is, they do not need to be, they may remain open, and still we may have philosophical knowledge, and we may make philosophical progress. Okay, so before proceeding, I think maybe just some clarifications on the use of truth and knowledge here, right? In the case of truth, what I think is relevant is that you don't need to commit yourself with any specific definition that is exceptional for the case of philosophical knowledge. I think for the majority of cases, you can choose your preferred definition of knowledge that applies for scientific knowledge too, and it may be in application here too. So, for example, the general structure, I know this is not enough, but the general structure in many cases of knowledge would be that, of course, we have a belief, right? And we have a compelling evidence or overwhelming evidence, and based on that evidence, we make a truth ascription, right? So we consider that the proposition in question, or and the belief also, is true based on that evidence, right? But this connects with the second point. So the second point is that I think the central matter here is not truth per se, but actually assertability conditions. This is mainly because even the best of our evidence does not guarantee the truth. But again, I am not making some claim as if this were something exceptional for philosophy. I think this applies for basically every sort of knowledge. Maybe we shall put into parentheses the formal sciences, but in the majority of cases, like the natural sciences and in the social sciences, I think this is the same problem is present here. And the main problem is related with the fact that evidence tends to be divisible, right? And the problem is that so we may have beliefs, or also we may have theories that may be grounded on great evidence, right? On overwhelming evidence that is also overwhelming evidence against the other alternatives. But of course, that does not guarantee that the theory in question or the belief in question is actually true, right? But this is like, the point is that that's the best we can do given our current evidence. But give me a second, please. Okay, but yes, the point that I want to say is that I think in many cases of knowledge, what is relevant, I think truth per se may be secondary. What is more relevant is the conditions for a legitimate assertion, right? Like, okay, that we have great evidence, and that based on that, then we can take some proposition as being true, right? But of course, being conscious that just because we have this great evidence that maybe is the best evidence we have now, it does not imply that the theory is actually true, or the belief that or that the belief is actually true. But again, what I wanted to remark about this is that I think this applies both to philosophy and to the sciences. So I don't think there is any particular problem here regarding the possibility of talking about philosophical knowledge. So, let's proceed with the development. Now, we can apply here the heuristic strategy known as supervaluating for analyzing the cases. So now I will propose a modification on the definition that Alan Hajic proposes in his 2016 article, Philosophical Heuristics and Philosophical Methodology. So the definition will be that supervaluating establishes that what's acceptable on all ways of making the arbitrary choice in question in a given domain is determinatively acceptable. What is unacceptable on all ways of making the arbitrary choice is determinatively unacceptable. So if you have a problem and all alternative resolutions to that problem agree on something, then you seem to be justified in holding that thing on which they agree, even if you do not know the answer to the original problem. And we can see this more precisely in borderline cases as follows. But yeah, I think that is mainly the point, that we have some problems in which it doesn't matter. The relevant point is that you have the problem and you have all the different alternatives that pretend to solve the problem. And in many cases, you would find that there is some conclusion in which all the alternatives agree. So it doesn't matter which of those alternatives is correct. In principle, you are justified in holding that conclusion specifically because whatever the correct answer is, that answer will also have that conclusion. So let's consider an analogy from another normative domains. I hope this is not too banal. So let's suppose, for example, the next case. Let's suppose we want to compare Lionel Messi against a forward playing in Aruba's amateur third division. Let's call this player S. the question is, we have a problem, okay? So the problem is Messi better than S? So we have at least 4 possible responses, right? The first one is that, yes, Messi is better than S. The second one is, no, Messi is better than, S is better than Messi. The third one is, no, Messi and S are on equal standing. And the fourth one would be, no, Messi and S are incomparable, okay? But the problem that I want to emphasize is that it doesn't matter which criterion of football betterness is intended to be used. Messi will always be obtained as superior in each criterion, okay? So for example, if someone maintains that the evaluative criterion to measure football superiority, at least in the case of forwards, is exempli gratia, the number of goals scored per season, it is highly likely that Messi will come out higher. Similarly, if someone maintains that it is the number of assists provided to other players, the number of passes successfully completed, the average amount of ball control, the ability to create chances, the ratio between goals scored and minutes played, etc., etc. The point is that in basically all of these plausible criteria to analyze football betterness, what most likely will happen is that Messi will come out superior to this Aruba's amateur third division player. And okay, so but even, of course, there is another case, that is that being more reasonable, if someone affirms that each of the previous ones does not constitute by itself a sufficient criterion of football superiority, but that the joint performance of each player with respect to all the criteria is what determines the issue, Messi again will come out in the first place. So I think this is what apply here if we apply the strategy of supervaluating. Okay, if we are not sure about which of the previous ones is the correct answer to the problem of what determines football superiority, we can simply supervalue, and we will see that basically on every single plausible criteria of football superiority, Messi will come out as the superior alternative. Please give me a second. Okay, so which in other words means that the weight of all available evidence is completely overwhelming in favor of A. That is, that Messi is indeed a better player than this player from Aruba's amateur third division, and overwhelming against the other 3 possible responses, right? Because also, for example, it is not the case that they are on equal standing. You literally have all the possible reasons in favor of holding that Messi is better than this player, and it is almost impossible to think a single reason on why it would be reasonable to justify in front of the community why this player from Aruba would be better than Messi, that why it would be reasonable to think this player would be better than Messi. So the thing is that a great number of reasons of all kinds can be put forward in favor of the first, and practically not even a single one in favor of the opposite. That is, this is a case in which we get an indisputable evaluative claim. Messi is indeed better than this player, and arguably than anyone that plays in Aruba's third division. So again, just clarificatory matter regarding indisputability. I wouldn't say that, again, just keep in mind what I said about the visible evidence, right? The thing is that given the current evidence that we have, at least, it seems to be that evidence is compelling in favor or overwhelming in favor of Messi's superiority regarding football. But of course, there could be future evidence, like other evidence that we're not currently considering, that maybe could turn over the decision to the other side. But this, of course, applies to basically every domain. But the thing is that a case like this, I think, illustrates what may be called comparative or relational knowledge, right? There, in many domains, including philosophy, we can make precisely this sort of comparative judgments between 2 alternatives. And in borderline cases, we will get responses that are indisputable in this same sense. So, but also, what I think is relevant to note is the following. It also provides us with negative knowledge regarding the big questions in that domain. Like, for example, who is the best football player in human history? Okay, so this may be an open question, but what I think is relevant to note is that the previous case provides us with negative knowledge precisely because we now know that at least one option is definitely not a viable alternative to the bigger question. So this option would be S. That is that player from Aruba is not a viable option to answer the bigger question about who is the best football player in human history. If we can make a comparative analysis and we get to the conclusion to a conclusion that may be, indisputable about one alternative being inferior to the other, then it simply is not, like, it makes no sense to continue to consider it on equal standing with the other alternatives regarding the bigger question about who is, in this case, the best football player in human history. Now we can discard an alternative. In this case, we can discard the plausibility of S being the answer to this bigger question. So something that I find funny is that I think that maybe this may be Popperian in a spirit, right? Like, of course, I do not buy Popper's anti-justificationism or anything like that. But what I think is that this idea that well, in his case, science may proceed in a negative way, eliminating alternatives that do not survive testing, and that way we may get closer to the truth, may also be applying here, right? In the sense that we can make many of these comparative analyses, in many cases concerning borderline cases, in which all the evidence seems to be in favor of one alternative. It doesn't seem to be in a space for doubt there. So we now can discard different alternatives more and more. So, but note, something that I think is relevant. Please give me a second. Something that I think is relevant is that, please note that we do have knowledge of the comparative case between Messi and S, even though we may not have knowledge regarding the answer to the bigger question of who is the greatest player in human history. Okay, so even if this bigger question is an open question, that does not preclude the possibility that we have knowledge regarding that same matters in comparative cases. Okay, so just a clarification that I think I didn't put in a right way. I mean here in the last point that we may not have knowledge of a definite answer, not knowledge in general, but we may not have knowledge of the definite answer to this problem of who is the best football player in human history. It may be the case that currently, given our evidence, maybe we do not know which one is the exact answer to the question, but we may have, as I was saying previously, some sort of comparative knowledge. For example, we may know that, for example, there are a couple of alternatives that seem to be the reasonable ones that may be the answer to the problem, but there may be many alternatives that are not reasonable alternatives, right? So, for example, we may have knowledge regarding that question that there are a couple of players that may be reasonable options. I don't know, like Pelé, Maradona, Messi, etc. But we also know that not every alternative is on equal standing here. For example, by these sort of comparative cases, as the one I mentioned, many cases can be discarded as plausible answers to this question by means of this sort of comparative analysis, like the ones I mentioned. So here is another borderline case. Suppose that you're asked to compare two lines of action in moral terms. One action is saving a drowning child, and the other is raping a baby. So if someone asks, is raping a baby morally superior to saving a drowning child? There are, again, four possible answers, right? The one is, yes, it is morally superior. The other is, no, it is the other way around. Saving a drowning child is clearly morally superior. C, no, they are on equal standing. And D, no, they are incomparable. But I think the thing is that the structure of the previous case, I think, may apply here too. Of course, you can appeal to an intuition to justify your answer, like in the previous case, but it need not end there. So yeah, that is the point. Alternatively, or complementarily with the appeal to intuition, you can supervaluate among all plausible answers to the problem of what makes some action good, and see that it does not matter what the correct answer to this other problem may be. On all plausible answers, you get the same output. So, for example, just a brief model. So let's analyze the morality of B. So you may start considering plausible criterion, plausible reasons, and you may start giving deontological reasons, consequentialist reasons, reasons from virtue theory, reasons from contractarianism, etc. For example, in the first case, in deontological reason, doing B violates at least one moral duty. Consequential reason would be that doing B worsens general well-being. I think I did not clarify this at the beginning of the case, but I think it is relevant at least in this case to clarify that the person committing this act would not increment his well-being, but the person being affected, in this case the baby, would be negatively affected. Okay, so the thing is that the person committing in this specific case, the person that is going to commit, that is going to rape the baby, is not compelled by any external reason, will not get better by doing so, etc. So there is nothing that gets better for this person if he or she is do so. Okay. So but the thing is that, okay, so we can start analyzing all plausible reasons, even if we do not know what is the like definite answer to the problem of what determines moral goodness, right? So the thing is, we again, a virtue theory reason, doing B would be vicious, a contradictory reason, B is not generalizable in accordance with what rational agents would accept in an idealized social pact, etc. And on the other hand, could a single strong reason be put forward in favor of B being morally acceptable? The thing is, I think not. So this is another case in which you can supervalue again among the alternatives. Basically, all possible reasons. It doesn't matter the variable. It doesn't matter if they're deontological or contractarian, etc. All seem to be in favor of one conclusion. So note that under any plausible definition of morally good or under any plausible normative theory of morality, A seems to be immoral. Sorry, not A, but B. B seems to be immoral. So from supervaluating, it follows that A is indeed immoral. Okay, so regarding disagreement. So the point is that although we can recognize that in various cases of philosophical disagreement, the evidence may be permissive. Like it may admit n equal or greater than 2 responses that both enjoy reasonableness, the above does not imply that it is permissive for every possible side. And I think this is pretty relevant to note regarding the possibility of philosophical knowledge. On the contrary, I think the evidence is usually conclusive in the first place against the acceptability or the truth of a multitude of possible answers to a philosophical problem. So for example, it is conclusive in favor of the unacceptability of any self-defeating answer or of any answer that incorporates a significant number of arbitrary assumptions for which it is not possible to offer a justification given the current state of human knowledge, or any response that incorporates a large number of ad hoc hypotheses, of any response that incurs in a non-innocuous circular reasoning, or of any response that incurs in a non-innocuous ad infinitum regression, or of any answer that pretends to have a deductive logical structure but is deductively invalid, etc. And please note that all of these criteria are the same that we may apply in theory choice in the sciences. So this is not more demanding in the case of philosophy, as many other philosophers here present, by the way, like Professor Williamson and Professor Priest tend to emphasize all the times. So yes, I think this is the relevant point. If someone wants to claim that these criteria are not capable of being reliable to produce knowledge on whether one alternative is preferable over the other in philosophy, but that they are in the sciences, they would have to provide an argument. Yes, the burden of proof would lie on the person that claims that. So let us propose something that maybe called something along the lines of the World Cup model of disagreement. The thing is that, first of all, it is relevant to note that not all alternative resolutions to a philosophical problem are active parts of the philosophical debate. Just a parenthesis. Well, I didn't mention other examples for matters of time, but I think the same thing may be applied to many cases. So for example, someone could say, okay, let's consider an epistemological theory that says that all beliefs that are merely true, it doesn't matter if they are justified, that all beliefs that are merely true are knowledge, are instances of knowledge. That is an epistemological theory. So the thing is, when you try to compare that theory with any of the theories that current philosophers discuss, there is not even one point of comparison. All the evidence, all the possible reasons you may want to analyze would go over the majority of the alternatives that the philosophers discuss, and that may apply to many other beliefs that in many cases the laymen maintain, right? Like, I don't know, freshman year's version of moral relativism, for example. Of course, there are versions of moral relativism in the literature, but they are not as unsophisticated as the ones that some lay people held, right? For example, they are not as easily as self-defeating as, for example, some other versions. So I think it is clear that we can identify these comparative, we can make this comparative analysis, and in many cases see that there are answers that are not disputable given the evidence. Okay, please. Okay, so yeah, for the contrary, philosophical disputes tend to be among the best or more sophisticated alternatives. I mean, disputes among, professional philosophers, the ones that are more capable of dealing with the evidence. That is not the case with many other alternatives that are not currently being disputed. So it is not the case that every single alternative that is a well-formed alternative to a problem is on equal standing. If that is the case, then we do have a lot of philosophical knowledge, even if philosophical disputes remain open. Well, I just wanted to say something a little bit regarding the problem of progress, right? So the thing is that what tends to happen in many cases is that, okay, we have alternatives that in many cases, for example, philosophers propose, and that they seem plausible, but as time goes on, we start seeing that they have a lot of problems and objections and things that the program simply can't deal with. And in many cases, simply the program is abandoned, or it is replaced by a program that is in a similar spirit, but that is more sophisticated. So what I just wanted to show here is that, we constantly make progress in philosophy, even if disputes remain open, because we currently, like these alternatives that will be the selective alternatives that are sophisticated are not static. Okay, so maybe some alternative may be considered reasonable at a given moment of time, but then counter evidence starts emerging, and that alternative simply gets abandoned or replaced by a more sophisticated version that tries to defend similar ideas. So the point is that we constantly get, I think, to better epistemic states of affairs in which we replace previous alternatives to solve philosophical problems that now show that they are not in a capacity to deal with the current objections. So further examples, let's consider this, like, for example, logical positivism or eliminative materialism, or John Stuart Mill philosophy of mathematics, or Descartes' epistemological project contained in Meditations. Like, for example, in the case of logical positivism, okay, yes, at the beginning, it was considered a pretty plausible alternative, right? But as time went on, many problems start emerging, right? So the thing is that from our current point of view in 2021, I think it is not plausible, given the evidence, that someone wants to maintain logical positivism exactly the same way as it was held by their original members of the Vienna Circle. I don't know if someone wants to claim, I don't know, Schlick's logical positivism. Of course, you can do something like a neo-logical, a neo-positivism, but that would be a different alternative. Yeah, that would be precisely an example of philosophical progress. You would be pretending to develop a theory that is not so easily refutable by the same objections that the old programming of logical positivism had, right? And the same may be applying to eliminative materialism, right? I think the thing is that, well, currently it is in the minority, but still some people defend it, right? But the thing is, it would be highly difficult, and I'm not sure that actually any current philosopher defends eliminative materialism exactly the same way as, for example, I don't know, Paul Shortland proposed it in his famous 1981 article, right? The thing is that, again, in this case, many objections start emerging. So what happened is that many people either abandon eliminative materialism as a plausible programming, or simply try to develop further, more sophisticated alternatives. But currently, it is not plausible, given the evidence, to defend the original version of eliminative materialism. So the philosophical community has moved over, I think. The same thing applies with logical positivism and with other alternatives. I don't think, for example, in the case of Descartes' epistemological project that is in the Meditations, that any single current philosopher is going to say that actually that project was successful, okay? That actually knowledge with certainty was grounded successfully by the arguments that Descartes developed in the Meditations. Of course, that does not imply that the book is not still interesting, or is not a genius work or something like that, or that it shall not be studied or something like that. The only point is that the theses contained in the book are no longer acceptable. And things, I think we can find many examples like this, and I think there are clear examples of philosophical knowledge. The evidence is compelling and overwhelming in favor of well alternative. Please give me a second. I'm almost going to finish now, but before that, I just want to read some couple of passages from a text by Gareth Williams that is called Kant's Account of Reason. And this is connected with the problem of intuition, right? Many people tend to emphasize the idea that philosophical evidence is grounded on intuition. I think we shall opt for an alternative that is more grounded on reasons, like the one I discussed, not just on intuition, because of the following problem. So For example, well, Garrett Williams says that Honora O'Neill situates the Kantian account of reason against three alternatives, which she labels the instrumental, the communitarian, and the perfectionist. The first remains very widespread, with Hume it regards instrumental reasoning as fundamental. The second sees reason as embedded within complex traditions. Rationality is what a given tradition or community takes to consist in. That would be communitarianism. A third option, akin to the forms of rationalism that Kant opposed, is to see reason as an individual capacity to discern or intuit normative truths. Arguably, all three accounts fail in providing reason justification to some audiences. The instrumental reasoner is accountable to no one, in fact, to nothing apart from whatever desires or ends he happens to have. Someone who takes her particular tradition to define what beliefs and practices count as reasonable as a communitarian can have little to say to those who stand outside it. That would be the case of Rorty, for example. And the person who believes he can intuit what is good or true will be mute or worse in the face of those with different intuitions. I think this is mainly the problem, that if you want to say that the evidence, I don't know, like I think Kripke said that, right? The philosophical evidence ultimately just lies in intuition. How can you respond to a person that simply claims that he or she is having a different intuition, right? How can you claim that your intuition is the right intuition or that it is the correct intuition? Okay, so well, just another passage more than of this same text. The self-scrutiny of reason is a scrutiny about all those who demand justification for any particular mode of thought or action. Such a view does not assume that we are necessarily bound to our interests and inclinations, as the instrumental account does. It does not ask us to rely on what others do accept, as the communitarian account does. It does not involve the fantasy that we already know or intuit what everyone should accept, as the perfectionist account does. It proposes instead a vision of human beings who are able to step back from their particular inclinations, habits, and intuitions, and who are willing to use their ability to seek terms that all can accept to construct an intersubjective order of coexistence, communication, and cooperation in terms that all can accept. So, of course, I'm not interested here specifically on whether Honora O'Neill's reading of Kant is exegetically right or not, but rather on the thesis in question. I think it may be relevant. So, conclusions. Basically, that in most cases, philosophical quarreling consists in disputes among reasonable alternatives, not among any alternatives. Reasonable alternatives are alternatives that are capable of dealing and updating with regards to the evidence. This allows us to see that even if philosophical disputes tend to remain open, that does not imply that we do not have philosophical knowledge, because in many cases, we do have knowledge on whether some alternatives is wrong, for example. And like Karl Popper said, knowing that may be relevant because it helps to get us, well, bracketed, closer to the truth. In that sense, it helps us to make progress regarding the more pressing questions. So that would be it. Here it was an appendix, but I think it will not be relevant now for matters of time. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luis, for your talk. I found it really interesting. I open immediately the space for question and answer. We have about 22 minutes because at 5 to 11, I will call for a little break. I have already the first question. Professor Timothy Williamson, I give you the floor.
Yeah, so thanks for the talk. I mean, I noticed that you used the category of evidence a lot, and I wonder what you're emphasizing that lots of different that the evidence doesn't usually determine the answer to the question in philosophy, but what how are you thinking of evidence?
Sorry, how what?
What's your conception of evidence? What is it that you're talking about?
Yes, I think. Thank you very much for the question. I think it would be something that I don't know. I think this may be is kind of Lonian. Maybe it speaks in favor of the given conclusion or the given proposition.
Yes, but I know I'm not asking about how how the evidence supports something, but what is the evidence? I mean, what does the evidence consist of? I mean, is the evidence some facts or some propositions or some experiences or what?
Yes, I think, yeah, thank you. I'm not sure. I think it would be propositions, but or maybe. I don't know if it would be possible that it is not one exclusive variable, but it could be more than one. Maybe it could be both propositions and facts. So as I was saying, sorry, there was a micro. Sorry, as I was saying, the thing is that no, yes. I think the answer I can give for the moment is I think it may be propositions, or it may, for example, arguments. I think arguments could be evidence in favor of philosophical conclusion.
Yeah, but then we would presumably get back to a discussion about what status the premises of the argument needed to have. I mean, the thing is, if I mean, we would need to know what kind of status a proposition had to have in order to be evidence, because it's not just any old proposition that's evidence. And you know, and if you're going for propositions rather than facts, that suggests that you think that the evidence can consist of, you know, can contain false propositions, and so that you could have a theory which was excluded by the evidence, but which was nevertheless true. So you know, because I think that you know, it's important to get what your conception of evidence is on the table, because that was playing a very important role in your discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. I completely agree with what you are saying. Yeah, but regarding that thing that you said, that so maybe we can, I think, discard a true theory. Yeah, I think that could be the case, but I think that could be the case also in the sciences, right? So maybe the problem would be that given some state of affairs, or given some context, we may think something counts as evidence. Yes, I know I'm not giving a definition of evidence, and I need to work on that. But we may consider something is evidence against a scientific theory, and based on that, we may simply reject that scientific theory just to later get to know that that was actually wrong evidence, right? Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it's odd, but it's kind of, I mean, I don't want to push this, but but wrong evidence might just mean something that we thought was evidence that wasn't really evidence.
Yes, yes.
But if that's the case, then it's still not clear that there is a category of false evidence. But yeah, I should let somebody else ask it there.
Okay, thank you very much for your intervention. I give the floor now to Professor Graham Priest.
Hi, Lewis. I'm certainly in general agreement with your conclusions. I kind of suspect we can do better than that, though. Look, there's a bunch of questions which should really be addressed before one tackles the question you're interested in. One of these is, what is a philosophical question? How do you delineate those from scientific questions? That's not at all easy. Another is, how much consensus do you need to make a claim to knowledge plausible? Or maybe the other way, how much lack of consensus do you need to make it implausible? And whose consensus is it that counts? You know, I get lots of papers from people who are not professional philosophers. Do I need to get their consensus too? I mean, I'm not going to go into these questions now, but I think they're questions that need to be addressed to address your question systematically. But look, however you settle those questions, I think we can do better than the cases you mentioned. For example, I think there's pretty uniform consensus at the moment that there is no version of the ontological argument for the existence of a Christian God that works, let alone the particular cases, the general claim, okay, that there's no version that works. Another one, I think there's pretty uniform consensus that Zeno's paradoxes of motion, at least most of them, don't work, and why. Okay, and I'm sure there are probably lots of other cases, but those two strike me as claims where I certainly claim to know that those are true.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I think I agree completely with all you said. Yeah, I think, no, I think I do agree. The thing is that, again, I think those same problems would apply if one wants to give a theory or an approximation on how scientific knowledge may work, right? So at least the thing that I wanted to emphasize was more of a continuity argument. That I don't think, for example, the things that you mentioned that I agree are extremely relevant are more problematic in the case of philosophy than in the case of other branches and like the sciences. So yes, of course, if someone wants to say whether some scientific conclusion counts as knowledge and something like that, it would have to face exactly the same difficulties. What I wanted to refute were what I was against was precisely like those people that pretend to claim that the problem of knowledge is specifically centered in the case of philosophy, so that these sort of problems are just the specific problems that preclude the possibility of philosophical knowledge, but not in other domains, like not in the domains of the sciences. But yes, I do agree, but that is definitely something that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
I agree with you. I don't think there's a difference of kind between philosophical knowledge and scientific knowledge. In fact, I don't think the distinction between scientific knowledge and philosophical knowledge is very well defined. And certainly in science, theories rise and fall, as they do in philosophy. I think a couple of things are different in science and philosophy. One is that in science, there tends to be more consensus synchronically than in philosophy. So, the consensus can change, but in particular areas, there tends to be more consensus in science at any time than philosophy, generally speaking, not completely. And secondly, a kind of interesting phenomenon, scientific theories rarely make a comeback. Whereas in philosophy, philosophical theories do make a comeback. Often they're slightly different versions of the same theory, but I mean, just think of virtue ethics, for example. I mean, this was dead in the water for a long time, and it's made a big comeback recently. I can't think of anything in science where that kind of comeback has happened. So, I mean, so there are some differences, but from the point of view of the issue you're dealing with about knowledge, I don't think they're significant.
Thank you. I think I agree with what you're saying. The thing is that what I wanted to say is that, for example, there are at least some cases in which we will get. There's a microphone. Wait, please just give me a second. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. What I was saying is that that we can identify cases in philosophy that may have the same level of agreement, or that are equally as indisputable given the evidence than some cases in the sciences. Of course, as you said, you will find many more cases in the sciences. But the point is that to refute the skeptic, I think you need to find that at least there is one case in which there is no overwhelming disagreement among philosophers on which the right answer is. And the thing is that many comparative cases are like this, I think. And I think this connects with one of the things you said regarding the comeback of theories. I think what is relevant is that what comes back is a more sophisticated theory. So as I was mentioning, I don't think that, for example, currently someone can defend logical positivism as it was originally defended by its authors in its different versions, because of all the great counter evidence there is. But of course, you can propose a more sophisticated version like the one Professor Lightgeb is doing, actually. But that would be, another approximation that tries to go in the same spirit, but that will be a different alternative to solve the problem. So the thing is that what I think would be relevant here is that what comes back is not exactly the same theory that was refuted or discarded in a previous moment, but rather maybe some programming that tries to preserve certain important ideas, but it tries to be precisely better than the previous alternative, that tries to deal precisely with that evidence with which the previous programming or the previous alternative is incapable of dealing with. But just coming back to the first problem, yeah, the thing is that, of course, yes, you're going to find more cases of consensus in the sciences. What I wanted to show is that this problem of disagreement that some people like Plant pose is not as they think it is, or you cannot infer from that that philosophical knowledge does not exist. And actually, we can identify many cases of comparative philosophical knowledge in which the level of indisputability, given the relevant arguments or the relevant reasons to consider, may be analogous to the sciences, like all those mentioned previously. You're muted, Professor Priest.
Oh, I just said we agree on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's go to the next question from Professor Eleonora Cresto.
Hi, thank you, Luis, for a very interesting talk. I was wondering, there seem to be two questions here. I mean, one is whether we can have knowledge in philosophy. The other is whether there's progress in philosophy. And they are related, of course, but maybe not necessarily the same. So in a Popperian view, as you suggested, progress is achieved by discarding theories, and perhaps you're right, and we can do that in philosophy. But perhaps we can talk about progress in philosophy regardless of whether knowledge applies. I mean, for example, we could say progress is related to, I don't know, having better questions, or providing better overall conceptual frameworks, or better grasping presuppositions of various theories. I mean, that's also knowledge, perhaps, but in an indirect way. I mean, not by way of saying that a particular doctrine is the true one. So I don't know what to think about this.
Could you please repeat the last point, please?
Yeah, sorry, with this computer, the sound is not too good, sorry. Maybe which part? I mean, I was trying to make a distinction between making progress in philosophy and having knowledge. So I said perhaps it's true that for some cases you discard theories in philosophy, so you gain knowledge by doing that in a way, but progress maybe is achieved independently of whether knowledge applies. So progress may be related to other things, like understanding, I meing, having, for example, formulating better questions. That's one way of achieving progress. Pinpointing in a better way presuppositions of various theories. And that's not necessarily related. I mean, that's knowledge maybe in some way, but not in the way of deciding that a particular theory or a particular conception is the true one, as opposed to the ones you refuted.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I agree completely with what you were saying. I think the point is, yes, that progress may be, like we may say that progress in philosophy is made in multiple ways, right? Not just in the one I was considering. So yeah, I think I do agree. And also I think that maybe some of the cases you mentioned would be cases of gaining more knowledge, like for example, the one of identifying or pinpointing the assumptions of the theories, right? And evaluating if they are good assumptions or bad assumptions. But yes, I think the point is that, yes, there are many ways in which philosophy can make progress. The point that I wanted to emphasize is that there is a way that is not, as you said, the only way in which philosophy can make progress, in which the central issue is that, we identify that some theories do not work, given the current evidence, are not as good as the other alternatives we have. And being capable of doing that, I think, is a good example of philosophical progress, or it is a case of philosophical progress that may not be easily denied, right? But of course, I completely agree that there are many other examples that are not strictly related with this matter of not strictly related with knowledge per se.
Yeah, thanks. Because my point was that maybe the important thing was to be able to tell whether there is some progress in philosophy or not, and not whether you have knowledge, you know, in this stronger sense. But I think we can agree more or less that I think we're on the same page anyway. So.
Okay, yeah, I perfectly agree. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you very much. I don't have other questions at the moment. I don't know if somebody want to put a new one. Otherwise, anyway, in a couple of minutes, we are supposed to make a little break. Okay. Right. So, if nobody has any question more, I will talk a little bit of the next two exposition. We will have the next two talks. We will have after the little break. Just a moment, I will share screen to show you better what we will assist in 10 minutes, in about 10 minutes, 9 minutes from now. I hope you see my page. The first one, Marius Augustin Dragici, from the Institute of Philosophy of the Romanian Academy, will talk to us about an epistemological correspondence between Gödel's view on mathematics and Kant's philosophy of science. This exposition, this talk will be given in English, of course. So as the second one, from Professor Miroslava Trajkovski from the University of Belgrade, Department of Philosophy. She will talk about semiotic implication. So this is the program for the next 2 hours, so till 1 o'clock. And okay, now a little break. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much to the two speakers of this morning. See you later.
Hello, Dr. Dragici. In a minute, we will start your conference.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I'm going to be the moderator of the next two talks.
Okay. Well, may I?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the.
Dr. Dragici, we will start in a minute.
Okay.
Okay. I will give you the heads up. Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Marius Agustin Dragici and the audience for being here.
Hello. Thank you.
Dr. Marius Agustin Dragici is senior researcher at the Institute of Philosophy and Psychology, Constantin Radulescu Motru of the Romanian Academy, being the head of the Epistemology department. His main lines of research concern epistemology, philosophy of science, and Kantian philosophy. Today, he's going to present to us his paper entitled An Epistemological Correspondence Between Gödel's View on Mathematics and Kant's Philosophy of Science. Mr. Dragici, you will have 30 minutes to present your paper, and the 25 minutes left will be dedicated to questions from the public for you to answer. Now you can.
Thank you very much.
Speak.
I will try to be in time, so to speak. Thank you, everyone. I will put on share screen. It's okay. Okay. My talk is attempt to reveal some unnoticed connections between some epistemological elements of Kant's theoretical program and Gödel's researches on the problem of the problem of mathematical objects. Generally, I will try to show that these analogies or similarities are not random. On the contrary, they disclose a more significant correspondence between Gödel's epistemological understanding on mathematics and Kant's view on pure a priori sciences from prolegomena and big critique. I will try to show that there is a correspondence between Gödel's way of sustaining the reality of the mathematical object and Kant's argumentative strategy of founding the categories and the pure a priori intuitions of space and time. In this respect, both Kant and Gödel, in spite of Gödel's own opinion, as we will see, develop a very similar justificative procedure concerning the objectivity level that is implied. Thereafter, more analogies rise between Gödel's mathematical intuition and Kant's pure intuition, between the Kantian synthetic a priori character and Gödel's non-empirical quality elements, and between the fruitful character of the truthfulness of axioms within mathematics and physics, and the synthetic a priori characters of the principles of pure mathematics and physics in Kant's program. But these kind of similarities are explained by the substantial correspondence between the epistemic status of the three theoretical levels of Kant's program and those of Gödel's viewpoint on mathematics, namely of the mathematical object, of the truthfulness of mathematical axioms, and of the Euclidean model of geometry. Now, some things about the mathematical object within philosophy of mathematics. As Quine argued back in 1953, the types of philosophical solutions of the fundamentalist perspectives, such as logicism, formalism, and intuitionism, set forth within the field of the philosophy of mathematics, are those that were given to the problem of universals, namely realism, nominalism, and conceptualism. A few words on how mathematical objects are considered in these perspectives. The realist approach is the closest to an understanding of mathematical objects as quasi-real existences, for it grants mathematical entities a kind of special reality, somehow autonomous, independent of our conceptual and linguistic constructions, but nevertheless untraceable in space and time. Both nominalism and conceptualism within the philosophy of mathematics do not endorse this type of ontology of mathematical objects. Thus, conceptualism conceives mathematical objects as abstract entities, conceptual schemes, mere theoretical structures. Nominalism reduces the whole mathematics to language gains, to some kind of linguistic convention. Well, with its representative like Russell, Church, Carnap, or Quine, logicism is the most important approach within the mathematical realism. It was involved in the elaboration and design of this standpoint within so-called the ontology of mathematics. Very close to mathematical realism were also Cantor, Bolzano, Whitehead, and Gödel. Regarding these three perspectives, the main remark is there is no empirical understanding of these objects. They do not exist as such. They are not real existences. In order to express my first idea, I will make some remarks on Gödel's work. The interest for the philosophical standpoints of the famous mathematician experienced a real acceleration, especially in our century, namely after the translation and publication of Gödel's manuscripts, with the exception of his correspondence that was completely published only in 2013. In my view, the significance of Gödel's constant reflections on mathematical objects within so-called field of meta-mathematics is due to the fact that they are circumscribed to this attempt to find what he calls the proper epistemological attitude, the very one that led him to his incompleteness theorem. As Gödel himself writes in a letter to Ha Wang from 1974, quote, the reason that logicians fail to deduce the completeness theorem from Skolem 1922 is the lack of the proper epistemological attitude regarding mathematics, end of quotation. In order to get to the core of my talk today, I will address now the subject of the influences of Gödel's epistemological view in general. So from a standard approach, one could say that the shape of this epistemological standpoint in general is due to the mixture of Platonic perspective, Leibnizian perspective, and Husserlian perspective, rather than to the Kantian one. But the Gödel himself also claims in a letter to Wang that until being influenced by Leibniz, whose philosophy he only began to discover in 1943, Kant's philosophy was the only one that had an influence on him, starting with 1922, so much earlier than the 30s. As I have already said in the abstract, in my talk I attempt to show that, despite Gödel's remark on his disagreement with Kant with respect to the epistemological status of the foundation of the mathematical object, a Kantian reading of Gödel on the subject from a certain Kantian interpretation subsequently leads to the idea that the two of them share a similar standpoint, and also to the epistemological correspondence says that I have announced. Now, although there is more references on the problem regarding the mathematical object, there are disparate, fragmentary, and non-systematic. So for this talk, I will refer mainly to some passages of Gödel's two well-known researches, Russell's Mathematical Logic, 1944, and What is Cantor's Continuum Problem from 1947, with the last version from 1964. Let's now see what Gödel's definition on a mathematical object looks like. Classes and concepts may be conceived as real objects, namely classes as plurality of things, sets, or as structures consisting of a plurality of things, and concepts as the properties and relations of things, existing independently of our definitions and constructions. My first remark is here that the way that Gödel distinguishes between the epistemological register of mathematical objects and that of our definition and construction is a consequence of conceptualist understanding of construction. So different, though, from the Kantian sense of the construction in pure intuition. The second remark is we notice here, although still not explicitly, how the objects plays the role of an unifying function. For example, classes as plurality of things. Starting from this definition, this short definition, let's now look at the larger context of our problem. Firstly, I will quote two short fragments of Gödel. I quote, "It seems to me that the assumption of such objects is quite as legitimate as the assumption of physical bodies, and there is quite as much reason to believe in their existence. They are, in the same sense, necessary to obtain a satisfactory system of mathematics, as physical bodies are necessary for a satisfactory theory of our sense perceptions." Russell's Mathematical Logic, 1944. From the second work, we have this, but despite the remoteness from sense experience, we do have something like a perception also of the object of set theory, as it's seen from the fact that the axioms force themselves upon us as being true. So is a discussion regarding the possible inspirational source of this position. So the way that Gödel's assertions are formulated resembles Russell's remarks in some works such as The Principles of Mathematics, where in the preface, he says something similar about logical entities. Also, in The Problem of Philosophy, Russell asserts the possibility of knowing the universals through direct experience. A first thing to note here is that Russell lacks the epistemological dimension. And secondly, Gödel's reference from his what is Cantor's continuum problem is, as we see below, to Kant. So this is the fragment addressed to Kant. It by no means, I quote, "it by no means follows, however, that the data of the second kind, by means mathematical objects, because they cannot be associated with actions of certain things upon our sense organs, are something purely subjective, as Kant asserted. Rather, they, too, may represent an aspect of objective reality, but as opposed to the sensations, their presence in us may be due to another kind of relationship between ourselves and reality." Well, some important remarks on the relation between mathematical object and category. I just have a comment here. Regarding the mathematical intuition, it does not need to be conceived as a faculty providing an immediate knowledge of the object concerned, but we form our ideas also of those objects on the ground of something else which is immediately given, Gödel says. Of course, this something else that he is talking about is not primarily the sensations. The something else besides the sensations actually is immediately given follows independently of mathematics from the fact that even our ideas referring to physical objects contain the constituents qualitatively different from sensations or mere combinations of sensations. For instance, the idea of object itself, whereas on the other hand, by our thinking, we cannot create any qualitatively new elements, but only reproduce and combine those that are given. Obviously, the given underlying mathematics is closely related to the abstract elements contained in our empirical ideas. And my comment is that one of the tracks leading to the interpretation that I propose here is Gödel's failure to understand this particular aspect in Kant's view, due to a misunderstanding of the different levels of the problem, the ontological one and the empirical one. In Kant, this mathematical object that Gödel talks about is to be found on the same epistemological level as Gödel's mathematical object. It is not transcendent, it is not immanent, it does not belong to the thing in itself, but as we have seen, it represents the formative character of mathematics, Gödel. And I say, by the contribution of the transcendental unity as the generic function of the understanding on pure intuition, like in Kant, expressible by the same level or certainty of axioms such as those in set theory invoked by Gödel. Regarding Russell, Gödel explicitly states that mathematical intuition does not presuppose a faculty that provides an immediate knowledge of objects, and it seems to be the case there. I shall present now a brief footnote, a very interesting note, where the question is the category the mathematical object? Gödel's interesting note. Note that there is close relationship between the concept of set explained and the categories of pure understanding in Kant's sense. Namely, the function of both is synthesis, the generating of unity or out of manifolds, in Kant, of the idea of one object out of its various aspects. My comment here is, therefore, if we consider that the concept of set is, in a way, a mathematical object, then it has, as Gödel claims, the attributes of the Kantian category, essentially those of the original synthetic unity of transcendental perception. If the concept of set is not a mathematical object, which would contradict Gödel's references, it should be of the kind of Kant's thing in itself, which would subsequently confuse things, because then the character of the synthetic a priori would be exactly circumscribed in a Kantian way, where the category must have the formative character. My answer here is this. From the viewpoint of mathematical ontology, Gödel cannot leave Platonism so easy, because the mathematical object is the data that activates the formative character. From the epistemological standpoint, that is what interests us, the mathematical object has the same status as the category, here as function that forms the concept of set, as it also appears in Gödel's quoted note. Kant's concept of object is an outcome of the contribution of the categories to the intuition of the phenomenon. From this point of view, I found important Gödel's analogy between the formative contribution of mathematical objects within mathematical intuition and what takes place independently of mathematics, but within the epistemological context of experience. The acceptance of mathematical intuition guarantees the epistemological correspondence with Kant's view. For the influence of the object on mathematical intuition leads to a shaped outcome. We can also find here Kant's synthetic a priori in the form of these non-empirical qualitative constituents. Assuming the epistemological level, now we can say about the justification of the mathematical object the following. The existence of certain kinds of objects, set, classes, or concepts, considered to represent the field of study of mathematics, is necessary in order to be able to explain the main features of mathematical knowledge, namely mathematical intuition and mathematical truth. Thus, the truth of axioms of set theory, which is self-evident, forces us to admit the existence of a perception of the objects of set theory. And this mathematical intuition cannot, in turn, be explained without assuming something given of a different kind than the physical existence, namely the mathematical object. Let's see now the structures of Kant's argumentative strategy of finding the categories. I will try now I will now try to show that Gödel's attempt to prove that mathematical intuition reveals the existence of mathematical objects under the action of self-evident truths, and Kant's attempt to establish the validity and objectivity of the categories of the understanding by investigating the possibility of pure mathematics are convergent. In Kant, this last approach is directly related to the way that he understands the relation between transcendental philosophy and sciences, pure mathematics and pure physics. Therefore, I proceed from a certain understanding of the critique of as an experiment in Kant's B preface and of pure mathematics within Prolegomena. Thus, I shall briefly resume, in the context in which the proposed interpretation will be inserted, what Gödel claimed that I have already presented above. So, in the B preface of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant explicitly proposes the understanding of his transcendental theory in the form or what he calls the experiment of pure reason. Here, in a few words, the summary of the experiment. In order to know something a priori about the outer object, it is required that our structure of knowledge to be a priori. Otherwise, it would be a posteriori, and thus all our knowledge will be empirical. But we are in possession of evident and apodictic knowledge. Consequently, in our interaction with external objects, we deal with phenomena, not with so-called thing in itself. Kant elaborates in B preface this assumption in terms of the hypothesis of the experiment. The success of the experiment is ensured from principles within B critique and from the results of the investigation of the possibility of the apodictic outcomes of pure sciences, but only and only if from the both ways we obtain the same table of categories. This experiment is structured and advocated mainly by combining two methods, the analytical method and the synthetic method. Although the directional logical meaning of these methods is also involved here, analytically from bottom up and synthetically from top down, it is not only the case, the methods being transcendentally redesigned. On analytic synthetic in Kant's B critique, we can say that Kant uses both the analytical method and the synthetic method in the second edition of his Critique of Pure Reason. Unlike the logical meaning, the transcendental meaning of Kant analysis is very similar to Newton's. The method of analysis appears with a modified meaning as an experimental method, where the emphasis is on construction. Kant took over this meaning of analysis and not that of logical analysis. Here we are interested mostly in the analytical method as it appears in the Prolegomena and the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason. The evolution of the theory within the critique from A to B edition can be illustrated also with by Kant's view on the two methods starting with the first edition. Here in A, Kant uses the synthetic demonstrative method expressed by the phrase from principles, establishing the a priori transcendental unity of a perception, and reaches certain results, the table of categories, which, dealing with the analytical method in Prolegomena, are obtained following the process that starts from the remarkable results of his contemporary sciences, mathematics and physics. Important remark here is that we do not refer to the contents of the proposition of those sciences, but to their a priori synthetic character within them, like Gödel's non-empirical quality elements. In the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason, in the framework of the experiment of pure reason, as it displayed in the preface B, as I have already said, there are announced both methods separately and combined, as they appear transcendentally redesigned in the metaphysical deduction and the transcendental deduction of the Critique of Pure Reason B, from the transcendental aesthetics and the transcendental analytics. Let's take a look now on the analytic method in Kant's Prolegomena. Therefore, the fact that Prolegomena is elaborated based on the analytical method is due to the fact that here Kant is considering the path that starts from something obvious, certain, the reality provided by the presence of synthetic a priori judgments as principles in pure mathematics, and then moves to investigate what makes the level of certainty possible. Kant explicitly states that the method we use now must be analytical in the sense that we will start from the fact that such synthetic knowledge by pure reason really exists because it is obvious. And what we must do is to investigate the ground of this possibility and to wonder how such knowledge is possible. It is now relatively easy to establish the connection to our discussion above, as the place where we have such kind of knowledge is pure mathematics and physics. In order to understand the whole picture, we now give a short excerpt from paragraph 6 of the Prolegomena, entitled, "How is pure mathematics possible?" Read as we propose it. The paragraph sufficiently summarizes the frame where I try to put the two views, Gödel's and Kant's, regarding the type of justification with respect to mathematical objects, Gödel respectively to categories, Kant. As for the possibility of pure mathematics, as I referred to above, it resides in human reason. More precisely, it presupposes an a priori ground of knowledge, which is deeply hidden. In fact, here are addressed the pure a priori forms, the pure intuitions of space and time, and the categories of the understanding. Then we see for Kant, the knowledge of pure mathematics promises unlimited expansion into the future. And it is apodictic knowledge in the sense that the necessity of principle is in no way based on experience. And at the same time, this kind of knowledge is enriching. It is synthetic. As we can see, for Kant, this kind of knowledge is not at all subjective, as Gödel thought. Moreover, Kant here may suggest quite well that what Gödel calls the fruitful character of truth, such as those of axioms in set theory. Along with mathematical intuition, Gödel proposes another criterion for the type of certainty of mathematical truth, such as that characteristics of the axioms of mathematics, namely their fruitful character. Fruitful or synthetic character within pure sciences. Here I will quote two short fragments. The first, besides mathematical intuition, there exists another criterion of the truth of mathematical axioms, namely their fruitfulness in mathematics and, one may add, possibly also in physics. The second, success here or fruitfulness means fruitfulness in consequences, in particular in verifiable consequences, demonstrable without the new axiom. This principle is to be found also in Russell. The importance that Gödel gives to the fruitful character of certain types of mathematical truths can be easily related to the constituents qualitatively different from sensations mentioned above. And this connection in turn can be mirrored with the Kantian synthetic a priori level and with the a priori characteristics of propositions within exact sciences. And now something more about pure intuition. In Gödel, we have mathematical intuition. In Kant, the pure a priori intuitions of space and time. For clarity, I only present below an excerpt from the 7th paragraph of the Prolegomena. We see that from the beginning, Kant distinguishes empirical intuition from pure intuition, and Gödel retains almost the same distinction. From this point of view, in Kant, pure a priori intuition work as a determinative foundation in respect with the construction in concreto of a priori mathematical concepts. The author of the critique claims explicitly above that if we succeed in discovering this pure intuition, as well as its possibility, we can easily explain how synthetic a priori judgments are possible in pure mathematics, and therefore how this science itself is possible. It also edifying in the same sense, in the sense of what I have said above, and I quote from Gödel, in spite of their removal of mathematical entities from the sensible experience, we must have some resembling a perception of the objects of set theory, as it follows from the fact that the truth of axiom is self-constraining. As we can see here too, Gödel seems to repeat almost synchronously what Kant did in his Prolegomena. Since the truth of the axiom is self-constraining, it is reasonable for us to admit something resembling a perception of the objects of set theory. Gödel says that this type of truth is constraining. In other words, starting from the evidence provided by this truth, we can arrive at something that made it possible, that is, the objects that are in question. And now on 3 epistemological level in Kant's program, the standard understanding of Kant's philosophy of science related with transcendental idealism reveals that Kant's historical sciences were the ultimate sciences. Here we have in mind Euclidean geometry, but especially in recent decades, there are some researchers that attempt to successfully reconcile transcendental philosophy with the philosophy of science in Kant, proposing perspectives that do not exclude current models in physics and mathematics. For instance, Michel Bitbol, David Hyder, or Ilie Pârvu. The analogy that I set forth here is grounded in a view of this type of Kant's transcendental philosophy, where I have also revealed the 3 epistemological levels that I will present here: that of the categories of pure understanding and of the pure a priori forms, that of pure mathematics, and that of the particular science of geometry, Euclidean geometry. Let's see how it goes with Gödel. Gödel's mathematical objects and 3 epistemological levels, example from geometry. In order to reveal these epistemologically different levels, I shall give now a short fragment from Gödel. As far as the epistemological situation is concerned, is to be said that by a proof of undecidability, a question loses meaning only if the system of axioms under consideration is interpreted as a hypothetical deductive system, if the meanings of primitive terms are left undetermined. In geometry, the question as to whether Euclid's 5th postulate is true retains its meaning if the primitive terms are taken in a definite sense. What is to be said in the 5th postulate as conceived by Euclid does not have the primary terms defined within the original axiomatic system. There is no reference to the number of dimensions of space, nor to its level of curvature. Therefore, it is undecidable whether or not this postulate is true. And the problem thus posed does not make sense. If the primitive terms, including Gauss curvature, are specified as k less than 0, k equals 0, k greater than 0, then we can easily say that the 5th postulate is true for the axiomatic system in which k equals 0. And in this case, we have to deal with plane geometry. Let's see now finally the correspondence between the epistemic status of the theoretical levels of Kant's program and those of Gödel's viewpoint on mathematics. From top to bottom, we have the first Gödel's level, which is the level of the formative mathematical objects, accessible in mathematical intuition via the special evidence of the truth of axioms, such as those in set theory. In Kant, we have at this level, the level of the categories of understanding, which are determinative at the level of the object. The second Gödel's level is the level of the evidence of the truth of these axioms, such as those in set theory, with undetermined primitive terms, which would hold the axiomatic part in general of a system. In Kant, this level is the level of pure mathematics, the a priori epistemological level where any model of geometry can be inserted, including the Euclidean one. And the third level is common for both Kant and Gödel, and is the level of the different models of geometry in our case, and the intentional model that imply the definition of the primitive terms. For example, the different types of geometries with their application, Euclidean, non-Euclidean, Riemannian, etc. Some 2 final comments. At this last level are also to be found the non-empirical qualitative constituents. However, these models of exact sciences, geometry is here, are not reducible to the general theoretical abstract framework and are subject to change. One of the best examples here is the role and status of 5th postulate of Euclid. Having in mind these constituents, elements with synthetic a priori characteristic identifiable in the evident principles of mathematics, Kant set forth in his explanatory approach in the Prolegomena the discovery of categories, as Gödel set forth the justification of mathematical objects from the evidence in mathematical intuition of truths, such as axiom in set theory. Thank you. I hope I I didn't.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dragici, for your excellent talk. Now we're going to open a space for questions from the audience. For that purpose, there are a couple of rules. First, everyone who wants to make a question must ask the word to my private chat, just writing the word question. 2, the question must be relevant or pertinent to the topic of the talk. If the question is not relevant or pertinent, won't be answered. And we will proceed with the following question. You can see your chat for these same rules. So let's give it a minute. If someone wants to ask a question to Professor Dragici, please let me know. We will give a couple of minutes in order to wait for the questions. Or if you want to, you can raise your hand. Okay, we have Luis Mesa who wants to make a question to Dr. Dragici.
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you, Professor Dragici, for your excellent talk. I just wanted to ask something related with some clarificatory matter. Is that I think I didn't understand exactly. Could you please expand on Gödel's notion of fruitfulness, please?
Yes.
We don't hear you, I think.
Hello?
Yes, now we do.
Okay. Well, for Gödel, this kind of property is to be found in what technically makes sciences to progress, in fact. if something is discovered and that outcome has this property, from that point, we can find not only in the discipline that we have this outcome, an extraordinary development condition which that have the condition in this outcome. This kind of characteristic is to be found also in some discoveries within mathematics, within geometry, of course. If we look at the Gauss curvature is an example, and so forth. This is my
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, both of you. We have another question from Mr. Graham Priest. Please.
Hi, Marius.
Hello, Professor.
Can I ask you about what I take must be a significant difference between Kant and Gödel on the philosophy of mathematics? As you know, Kant took it to be synthetic a priori that the geometry, physical geometry of the cosmos was Euclidean. Okay, he was writing before non-Euclidean geometry, of course. And we now think that it isn't. And what that realization has forced us to do is distinguish between pure and applied mathematics. Pure mathematics is one thing, and applied mathematics is a different beast. Now, as far as I know, you don't find any distinction between pure and applied mathematics in Kant. What Gödel's view was on applied mathematics, I don't know. I've never read anywhere where he discussed it. I don't even know if he did discuss it. But since his writing in the 20th century, he must distinguish between pure and applied mathematics. So my question is, how do you see the difference, or how would you think the difference would be between Kant and Gödel on the question of applied mathematics?
Regarding Gödel's view on this, I don't know much data, but in Kant, what can I say is the way that pure mathematics or applied mathematics or something like geometry, Euclidean geometry, for instance, the place and the specificity of this kind of disciplines are to be distinguished from the transcendental philosophy, in the sense that the transcendental philosophy is, in a sort of speak, a frame theory for these models. And if we look at the axiomatic system in general, we find that, as Gödel says, the axiomatic part is somehow on the same approximativity level that we have in transcendental philosophy, and in the moment that we have those terms, those primitive terms determinant, we will have one of the possible models, exactly with the case of geometry, of Euclidean geometry. So from that point of view, this relation between between transcendental philosophy and models, different models of sciences. If we can find, and some did, this kind of connection, we also can understand something about the nature of our knowledge in general. As Gödel's achievements, incompleteness theorem, in a way, tells us something similar in a way. We are not able from the borders of a science to determine the whole structure, axiomatic structure, and the whole certainty that satisfies those fundamental conditions possessed in Gödel's model. I'm sorry, I don't have a practice for talking in this kind of problems, but I try to put some thoughts here.
Okay, can I ask a second question?
Yes, please.
In terms of the 20th century, it's usually thought that Brouwer was closer to Kant than Gödel, precisely because he calls his view intuitionism, and endorses the thought that Kant's view of arithmetic being the structure of time is what informs his intuition of two oneness. Do you think that Gödel's closer to Kant than Brouwer is?
Unfortunately, I didn't understand exactly what you tries to say, Professor.
Okay, let me put it simpler. Usually, people think that Brouwer is much closer to Kant than Gödel, and I wonder if you have a view on that.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you both for your questions and answers. For now, it seems that we don't have any further questions for Mr. Okay, we have one more question from Luis Mesa. Come.
Thank you, Pedro.
Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask something that I think this may be a dumb question, but sorry, the problem is that I didn't understand towards the last part of the talk. Could you please explain again, because I didn't understand how is that Kant's proposal is able to incorporate non-Euclidean geometries? Yes, that would be.
Yes, this is one of the main problems of the exegesis, Kantian exegesis. In my book from 2010, I did a solution there. It's very, very complicated, and in English, for me, it is impossible to do that. I hope I will be able to publish my book in English soon. Let me tell you just the framework of the solution, of a possible solutions. The transcendental level is functional only if, Kant says that only if at least one model of science can be somehow justified within it. But this model doesn't reduce to transcendental philosophy, but it works as other models. And the Euclidean case is exemplar. So if we find in Kantian thought and in Kantian transcendental philosophy, in my opinion, in big critique, the whole tools for that, especially in transcendental deduction and metaphysical deduction, then we find somehow one of the key of understanding Kant and to understand more than that, even how is now the relation, how could be the relation now between our possible knowledge and what's happening in the theoretical physics, for instance. I saw Professor Rovelli's intervention, and it was very wonderful for me to hear and to see from such scientist that what Kant said many years ago, it is fit on what is happening now within science and philosophy of science. So I will send you my book if I will succeed to translate in English. Thank you.
I will love that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you, Dr. Dragici. With this, we close the space for questions and answers. Again, thank you very much to Dr. Dragici and the audience for joining us. The next talk, entitled Semiotic Implication, will be given by Dr. Miroslava Trajkovski at 12 p.m. So we will have a 5-minute recess. Thank you very much for joining us.
Let me check. Hi. May I ask you if you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay. Okay. See you later. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Самое важное для нас изобразить. Oh.
Dr. Trzaskowski, in a couple of minutes, we will start your presentation. I will present you and give you some instructions, and then you can start with your talk.
Thanks.
We are going to start now. Thank you very much to Dr. Trzaskowski for being here and the audience. Dr. Miroslava Trzaskowski is Associate Professor at University of Belgrade, Department of Philosophy. Her main lines of research concern the philosophy of emotions, the philosophy of perception, and the philosophy of language. Today, she's going to present to us her paper entitled Semiotic Implication. Dr. Trzaskowski, you will have 30 minutes to present your paper, and 25 minutes left will be dedicated to questions from the public for you to answer.
Thank you.
Please.
The title of my paper is Semiotic Implication. The aim of my paper is to give a semiotic reading of modus ponens. Namely, I will argue that this material implication can be given a semiotic reading. I will argue that this material implication can be replaced by a semiotic statement expressing the relationship, semiotic relationship between the two predicates. It can be replaced by M is an index of C, or C is an icon of M. For what purpose I'm going to do this? The immediate purpose is to answer the question about the status of enthymemes, actually to contribute to the answer to the question, what are enthymemes? why I am doing this and why it is a debate among philosophers of logic, or a topic in philosophy of logic. It starts with something that Wilfrid Sellars said. He said that it is a received dogma that the reasoning of this kind, it is raining, therefore the streets will be wet. Can you see my board? Okay. It is raining, the streets, therefore the streets will be wet. Sellars says that it is a received dogma, that this is an antinomy, and therefore that it is not complete, that it is invalid if it is presented in this form. That this reasoning is an abridged version of it is raining. Whenever it rains, the streets will be wet. Therefore, the streets will be wet. Sellars said that in one less known paper, from less known in comparison to his other papers, paper Inference and Meaning from 1953. And there he attempted to introduce some kind of material rules of inference, claiming that actually this form, which seems to be incomplete, is absolutely complete, even valid, and that the consequence, the streets will be wet, follows not by the rule of logic, by some logical rule of inference from it is raining, but by some kind of material rule of inference. Later, Robert Brandom tried to contribute to this topic, and Robert Brandom tried to develop this notion of material rules of inference from Sellars, and he introduced some validity, which he calls material correctness. Actually, he says, he talks about material correctness, but essentially he compares material correctness, i.e. Material validity, with logical validity, and he argues that material validity, which is a kind of validity, which is characteristic for such inferences. For example, Sellars' example, it is raining, therefore the streets will be wet. Robert Brandom would claim that this reasoning is materially valid, and what is important in Brandom's arguments is the fact that he is taking material validity as being as formally valid as logical validity. He does that by defining validity through formal validity, through by relying on the notion of the fixed vocabulary. And he says, for example, if we have an inference, Ivo Andrić is a writer. If an X is a writer, then he is an artist. Therefore, Ivo Andrić is an artist. Here, this inference is valid due to its logical vocabulary, which means due to the meaning of the expression if then. And this expression is fixed in a sense that everything else we can replace by some rules of substitution. And we can say whatever we want. We can say Ivo Andrić is a painter. If an X is a painter, then he's an artist. Ivo Andrić is an artist, or we can even change artist. We can add whatever we want, a normal story. But Brandom claims that we can, if we look at this argument, Ivo Andrić is a writer, Ivo Andrić is an artist, then we can see that we can fix is a writer, is an artist, and we can change and replace Ivo Andrić with William Shakespeare, Faulkner, Picasso, or any other name. So, and the idea of Brandom is that is actually very important to accept such inferences as being primitively valid or materially valid, because through embracing such inferences, we are actually learning the meanings of non-logical vocabulary. So the point is that by grasping the inferences with the fixed logical vocabulary, we learn the meanings of logical terms by grasping by endorsing, accepting inferences of this kind, which means with the fixed non-logical vocabulary, we grasp non-logical terms. And he calls it material validity, and he says it is also valid, good due to its form, because the form is given by the structure, and the structure is given by this fixed vocabulary, which is not open to substitution. Robert Brandom makes these attempts in many papers and books. The most, maybe the first important is his book, Making It Explicit. And in the very title of the book, his main idea is expressed. That book is from 1994. And his idea is that if we have an ordinary modus ponens P, if P then Q, therefore Q, there is no room for this implication if P then Q in this inference, simply because Brandom says, first, our language need not be rich enough to contain the conditional, the expressions for conditionals. And then the function of the conditional, if we have the language, a language rich enough, is to make this reasoning from P to Q explicit, which means that the action comes before theory. The praxis is before theory, and if P, then Q is a part of theory. So the main argument of Brandom's is that the conditional is actually something that comes after the reasoning, and it may pass centuries or more before we have a language rich enough to express, to make explicit what we actually already did many times implicitly. So the main problem, which is seen by Brandom, is the question of the status of this implication, actually of the conditional. It is interesting to mention how Gilbert Ryle also addressed this problem. He introduced the notion, a notion of inference ticket, because he was also thinking, of course, before Brandom and before Sellers, obviously, we can find that in his the concept of mind. His idea is that to put if P then Q as a premise of this argument amounts to a categorical mistake. His reason for such a claim is based on his understanding on what Lewis Carroll did in his famous paper, in which he explained by creating a paradox that the rules of inference cannot be treated as premises in the argument. So, and it is well-known argument, and it goes as follows. Lewis Carroll says, if we have P and if we have P then Q, and we use modus ponens to infer Q, then we cannot, if we want to put a rule of inference as a premise, then we will put this modus ponens as another premise, and here the regress, infinite regress begins, which means that the conclusion could not be reached. So, and what is the difference, and what is Ryle's understanding is that this regress begins already here with this if P then Q. Namely, Ryle sees and understands if P then Q as a kind of license to make a transition from P to Q, and he thinks that as a license, it is a kind of ticket, like a normal ticket for traveling from one place to another. And this ticket is not a part of a journey, says Ryle. It is just a kind of license, a permit for passing from traveling from one city to another. So he also, by analogy, says when we know if P then Q, when we know the conditional, what we know that we can pass from P to Q, and there is no room for this conditional among premises, simply because a ticket cannot be a part of this inferential journey. That's why he calls it inference ticket. He calls it inference ticket because, of course, when you say if P then Q, it cannot be universal. It cannot be rule in the same sense as modus ponens is a rule, but it doesn't bother Ryle. He says, of course, permits should not be universal at all, because if they are universal, then they are not permits. Permits should make constraints. So I just illustrated how this discussion against this status of obviously logically invalid arguments, how this discussion goes, and it threatens the very concept of enthymem's. And what I see as a common point among Sellers, Brandom, and Ryle is that they kind of also share one dogmatic belief, one dogma, that an enthymem as seen as an invalid inference is logically useless. And it is really not true, Because in one famous paper, again, I think because in that paper, Anderson and Belknap in 1961, kind of philosophically represent their idea of relevant implication, and they use the concept of enthymem to argue against material implication and against strict implication, to introduce the need for some other implication, namely relevant implication. How they argue? They say we have a major premise, a minor premise, and conclusion. They say all bodies moving in elliptic orbits are subject to the law of gravitation. Minor is comets move in elliptic orbits. Therefore, the conclusion is comets are subject to the law of gravitation. They say that if we have a valid argument, then there is a feeling or opinion or a belief that there should be some corresponding true proposition. And it is natural to assume that this true proposition would be in the form of a conditional, in the form of if major and minor, then conclusion. And they ask the question, what would be the adequate implication behind this verb form, if then word form is sorry. And they argue as this. Let us assume that it is a material implication. And let us assume that minor premise is true. But then we have a conjunction. If one conjunct is true, then it is suppressible. And then we have if major, then conclusion. And then by this equivalence, we have that from major premise, we infer the conclusion. And they say, if we take material implication, we will get the result that an enthymem is a valid inference. So, and that is absurd. The same strategy they apply for strict implication, and the same happens simply because if necessarily major and minor, then necessarily conclusion, and then we again have that an enthymem, an enthymem is a valid argument, and therefore they say some other kind of implication is needed. Of course, this is not my topic, but what I want to point out here is that there is no reason to save the validity of incomplete arguments because their logical value can be seen from arguments of this kind as are given by Anderson and Belknap. Another worry, another point, another common point among Sellers, Brandon, and Ryle is something I'm arguing now. I'm starting my argument against that point. It seems that they assume that if a conditional is not present as expressed by an implication, it means for them as I understand the consequences of their claims, that it is not present at all. I'm going to argue that the conditional relevant for the modus ponens, if when it is not present in the form of some kind of implication, it can be present as a semiotic statement about the relationship between the two predicates. And now, since I discussed antonyms, it is necessary to turn to Aristotle and his definition of antonyms. It is well known again that Aristotle introduced the term antonym in philosophical discourse, and many philosophers, maybe logicians, assume that Aristotle defined an antonym as an incomplete argument, simply because it is usually, and even Anderson and Belknap assume that an antonym is an incomplete argument. And that's, I'm not arguing against that. It's completely okay to have that meaning of an antonym. But what is important for my purpose is that historians of philosophy rightly noticed that Aristotle did not define antonym as an incomplete argument. Actually, Aristotle defined an antonym as an inference from probabilities and signs. And Aristotle does not, it is in prior analytics, and Aristotle does not give examples of inferences from probabilities in this context. He gives 3 examples for inferences from signs, which means I can say that I can phrase it that Aristotle actually defined antonyms as semiotic inferences. And Aristotle says how a sign may be taken in 3 ways corresponding to the position of the middle term in the figures. It can be taken as the middle term in the first figure, the middle term in the second figure, and in the middle term in the third figure. But you can see from these examples that Aristotle actually gave incomplete versions of these arguments. I will return to this point now. I have to hurry to finish my talk to come to the conclusion before the time is gone. I don't know. These are his examples. This woman has milk. This woman is with child. This woman is pale. This woman is with child, therefore is with child. Pitakos is good, therefore wise men are good. So now completed forms of these inferences are: this woman has milk. Having milk means pregnancy or being with child. Therefore, this woman is with child. The second figure, this woman is pale. Paleness is a characteristic of pregnancy or being with child. This woman is with child. The third, Pitakos is good. Pitakos is wise. Wise men are good. Middle terms are milk. Middle terms appear in both premises, but not in the conclusion. Pale, and Pitakos. When we write these inferences formally, they appear in this way. I argued for these readings of these examples elsewhere, and I can only briefly say if M is milk, A is M, for any X that is M, then it follows that it is C, therefore A is C. Here we have, so you can see A is P, if X is C, then X is P, A is C, and if C is with child, P is paleness, and A, small a is Pittacos, G is good, W is wise. So if A is G, A is W, we have that all wise men are good. What we can see here is that only the first example, when completed, is deductively logically valid. The second and the third example, when completed, are even as completed, invalid. So now, so what I'm going to do now, this was a discussion about enthymem's as inferences through science. And it is natural and almost necessary, if you want to understand what is going on in these examples, to use some of Peirce's semiotics. And it is natural to try to see whether it is in some way useful for understanding Aristotle. Actually, it would be the other way around. Aristotle would be useful for understanding Peirce. But first step first, Peirce did not rely on Aristotle when he was discussing his theory of science, his semiotics, but he relied on Aristotle when he was discussing three kinds of reasoning, deduction, abduction, induction, and Peirce showed he correlated deduction with the first figure, abduction with the second figure, induction with the third figure. So it is natural to try to see what is happening in Aristotle's examples, and somehow we are led to see that this is deduction, this is the second one is abduction, and the third one is induction. Then another question, which I termed Peirce's dilemma. It is the dilemma that Peirce posed, but he didn't solve it. We who read Peirce, we want to see what is going on there, because I think it is very important to solve this question, and you will see why I think that. The dilemma is Peirce wanted to relate deduction, abduction, and induction to his theory of science, to symbol, icon, and index. It is the main division. Symbol is a sign that signifies due to some convention, icon due to some similarity with the object the sign refers to, and index refers to its object by some real existential relationship among them. So the first early view of Peirce was that deduction proceeds through symbol, abduction through icon, and induction through index. The second view was that deduction proceeds through index, abduction through icon, and induction through symbol. So which one is right? As I said, at another place in detail, I'm solving and analyzing this dilemma, but I can briefly say that I was led by something I saw in Aristotle's text, and I repeat again that in this context, Peirce did not refer to Aristotle. So there are 3 points, 3 observations I am going to make. We saw that in our examples, the first example of Aristotle was deductively valid. The second and the third were invalid. It corresponds to deduction, abduction, induction. Aristotle also says that the sign which is appearing in the first figure is irrefutable, while the signs appearing in the second and the third figure are refutable. And moreover, Aristotle says that it would be good to call the sign which appears in the first figure an index. So the starting point was to see whether it is plausible to read deduction as being the reasoning through index. So, the way I solve Percy's dilemma is that in the first figure, in his first example of science, and the missing premise should be read M is an index of C. In the second example, the missing premise should be read P is an icon of C. And the third example was the most difficult to adjust to some natural understanding of what is going on in semiotic relationships. It is the question, what Pittacus is a sign for? And the answer is pretty obvious. Pittacus is a sign for Pittacus. It is a name that is introduced by convention, and it is introduced to symbolize, to refer, to signify that person, Pittacus. So, in conclusion, what was the issue I was dealing with in this paper was this inference. A is M. If X is M, then X is C. Therefore, A is C. And but for the readings of this implication, the analysis of the second example of Aristotle's is important, because we see here that the consequence is read as P is an icon of C. And when we apply our analysis to the case we are dealing with, we have that this material implication from modus ponens in predicate logic can be read semiotically as M is an index of C, or C is an icon of M. So to return to the main question, what happens with the reasoning from A is M to A is C? What is missing here? Ryle, Brandom, Sellers would say nothing is missing here. I disagree, and I think that it is true, and I agree with that, that our language could not be rich enough to contain an instrument for expressing conditionals, but it does not mean conditionals in the form of implications, but it does not mean that the content of that conditional is not present in this reasoning, for it may be present in some more basic form as a semiotic relationship between those predicates. We can put either M is an index of C, or C is an icon of M. And I will end with saying it may, this semiotic relationship may not even be said, but in a sense, it can be seen. So that's the end.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tchaikovsky, for your wonderful talk. Now, we are going to open a space for questions from the audience. For that purpose, there are a couple of rules. One, everyone who wants to make a question must ask the word to my private chat, just writing the letter Q. 2, the questions must be relevant or pertinent to the topic of the talk. If the question is not relevant or pertinent, won't be answered, and we will proceed with the following question. Now, we have one question, and this question is from Professor Williamson. Please, Professor Williamson, make your question.
So I have a historical question. So as I understand it, you were contrasting the tradition of Ryle and Sellers Brandom with a different tradition of Aristotle and Peirce for handling some these sorts of examples, and I just wondered whether there's any sign of the awareness on the part of Ryle or Sellers or Brandom of this alternative, because I mean Ryle, I mean he certainly knew Aristotle because he was trained in ancient philosophy. He might well have read Peirce as well. And of course, Sellers and Brandom are, I mean, they're often sort of classified as neo-pragmatists, and so sort of put in the same tradition as Peirce. And I just wonder if they show any awareness of this alternative.
Thanks. First, I'm reluctant to say, but I am opposing Sellers, Brandom, and Ryle. To my view, what I'm presenting does not come directly from Peirce. Peirce is not talking about these things. He had other topics, many other topics, and he never solved this dilemma. And I assume that this problem in Aristotle and his definition of antonyms wasn't so important for him, simply because it is true. It is a received view that antonyms are not important. Even Anderson and Belknap, they start with their paper. Here it is. With it belongs to dark ages, the concept of antonyms. So it's not that. But I started to read papers on antonyms because I read things on inferentialism. I read Brandom, of course. I read Ryle, Sellers, and as you know, because I'm teaching contemporary philosophy. And then you create some picture from these elements of the puzzle. And constantly this question about the status of implication and how to understand if-then in ordinary language is present. And then when you see that people are claiming that incomplete reasonings are kind of complete and valid, it is really frustrating. So it's not something you cannot be so philosophically broad to deny modus ponens. It was strange for me that people like Ryle can claim such things like Sellers or like Brandom, but obviously there is something in what they're saying. And then I simply read Miles Bernier, and he says Aristotle didn't define antonyms as incomplete inferences. And then I read this bit, and it was so obvious because I knew Peirce's semiotics to think how I can relate to the two. And actually, my solution of Peirce's dilemma is less common if anybody wants to solve this dilemma. There are maybe more important things to solve. But my understanding is against the mainstream, because nobody wants to relate deduction with indexes, because it's kind of indexes context dependent and deduction is not. But it is very simple when you pose a question and you have two great men to consult, Aristotle and Peirce, and then somehow, slowly, but some solution comes. So it's, and I know that Peirce read Aristotle, of course, he was impressed by Aristotle, and the whole story about Peirce's Lógica, Athens, Utens, is based on Aristotle. And that is also interesting because Peirce was one of the founders of modern logic. How come to come back to, so everything was interesting there, and the question after question, and then I realized how it is strange, but I read, suddenly I saw that this simple implication can be read as the relationship between index and icon, and it follows. It's so is that the answer?
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you very much to Mr. Williamson and Dr. Trajkovsky. Now we have a question from Mr. Graham Priest. Please, go ahead, Mr. Priest.
Hi.
Hi.
I was a bit puzzled by the Peticus inference. So I was trying to track it down in the analytics, and I haven't been able to do that. But I found a reference to it in a paper by Steve Reed, who's a very reputable scholar. And he suggests that in the analytics, the conclusion of the inference is some of the form some wise man is good, not all wise men are good, which would make it, a much more plausible inference.
No, the inference is wise men are good. The conclusion is wise men are good. It's not some wise men are good. No, am I interrupted you?
No, look, all I know is what this article by Steve Reed says, and he agrees with you.
Yeah.
But he thinks it should be interpreted as some wise men are good, precisely because what Aristotle goes on to say.
If you want to make it valid, then obviously the conclusion should be some wise men are good. So the difference between my reading of Aristotle and his examples, and probably from Professor Reed's, is that maybe I was biased. I was trying to read it from the perspective of Peirce's correlation between deduction, abduction, and induction. For my purposes, so I cannot say I don't know ancient Greek. I'm not a scholar in Aristotle, so I cannot say that my reading is perfectly correct. But I think that it is correct in a sense that it can be related to Peirce's analysis of the relationship between the figures, Aristotle's figures in deduction, abduction, and induction. And it is faithful for my reading is faithful to Aristotle's text, because Aristotle does not say the conclusion is some wise men are good. He says wise men are good.
Okay, but look, I haven't got the Aristotelian text in front of me. All I've got is this paper by Steve Reed. And he says that Aristotle says that the inference form is Diracti. And if it's Diracti, it has to have a particular conclusion.
As I said, I don't think that anything that I do or what Peirce does should be interpreted in terms of traditional syllogistic logic. I think that that logic is gone. That logic is replaced by new modern logic. There are bits of Aristotle's analysis that are still important. So I don't search particular syllogism that are valid in first, that all are valid in the first figure. And so it's just, for my purpose, it is very important that the second example and the third example correspond to Percy's abduction and induction. Therefore, they should be read as invalid, because abduction is invalid and induction is invalid. So, but obviously I should. Make a comment for my paper, other paper, historical paper, using your suggestion.
Well, the paper I've been looking at by Steve is called Aristotle's Theory of the Assoteric Syllogism.
Okay.
I don't know where it is. I presume it's on Stephen Reed's website, so you might want to check it out.
Yeah, Google will know.
It will.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Priest, and thank you, Mrs. Strajkowski, for your participation. We don't have any more questions, but I don't know if someone wants to participate. The space is open. Okay. Okay, we have Lorenzo here. He's going to tell us something.
Thank you very much, Pedro. First of all, I want to announce briefly, so very quickly, the expositions we will have in the first afternoon. It means 2 o'clock, in 1 hour and 12 minutes from now. Just a second, I will show you. I'll show you immediately. Okay. Share screen. Sorry for the times. Yeah, I think you see my page. The first one at 2 o'clock will be by Alan Arturo Gonzalez, professor in the School of Philosophy in the National University of Costa Rica and in the University of Costa Rica. Will be in Spanish. Río Celeste, Costa Rica, un caso para el realismo indirecto y por qué nuestra intencionalidad y fenomenología no están determinadas externamente. Then we follow the talk of Felipe Vargas Sotela, or in Spanish this too, student of the University de Costa Rica, Universidad de Costa Rica, Fenomenología, Epistemología y Filosofía de la Ciencia. Repito entonces, esta tarde 2 exposiciones en español a partir desde las 2 de la tarde con preguntas y respuestas directamente en español. Muchas gracias. Espero que me vean bien. I wanted just to say a couple of words for the English-speaking people present here, because maybe this afternoon they will be not with us. So ladies and gentlemen, now, having almost reached the end of this event, the third epistemological colloquium and first Congress of Logic, Epistemology and Methodology of the University of Costa Rica, I can affirm that thanks to you, to all of you, speakers, organizers, and not least general participants, the event was developed in the best possible way. developed in the best possible way, thus laying the foundation for potential evolution in future editions, as well as a very important thing for the institution in which I work, and for all institutions in general that address knowledge in the broadest sense, have been generated new communication channels and networks, both intra and interdisciplinary. Specifically, my gratitude goes first of all to my colleague and friend Juan Diego Moya Bedoya, who supported and favored my current direction of the event and put his precious experience at the service of the organization. Second but not least, I would like to thank the student colleague and friend Luis Angel Meza Chavarria, here with us, whose promptness and undeniable organizational and communicative capacity have made it possible to reach the current scope and level of the Congress. Finally, I want to thank among the organizers my colleague and friend Mario Alberto Solisumagna, who from the beginning supported and encouraged our ideas and the ambitious project of this event. For the same reasons, I pay tribute to the direction of the school in the person of Mauricio Molina Delgado and the Institute of Philosophical Research, whose direction is entrusted to Sergio Rojas Peralta. Finally, my best thanks to the technical staff, Andres Venegas in the first place, as director of the section, but also to the creativity and the skills of Orlando Morales and Barbara Medrano, and to the support of Vanessa Mora. Closing this talk, I reiterate my thanks to all of you for being here today and for having been with us during the last week. Thank you very much to all the presents.
Thank you, Lorenzo. We will have a 2 hours recess before the next conference block begins. So good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
1 hour.
1 hour.
Okay, 1 hour recess. Sorry. Good afternoon.